Well, everyone, in anticipation of spring, I wish you all a happy, healthy, and inspiring Nowruz 2025. I also welcome you to today's session of Rethinking History, returning to archives and documents, a monthly virtual seminar series co-convened with my colleague, Professor Arzu Azad of Oxford University. We especially thank Dr. Viola Allegranzi of Australian Academy of Sciences for accepting our invitation to share her scholarship on architectural inscriptions from 10th to 13th century Afghanistan. The Rethinking History series is sponsored by the Department of Continuing Education at Oxford University and Roshan Cultural Heritage Institute. We are grateful to Roshan Cultural Heritage Foundation and Dr. Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali for their exemplary support of the Institute. At the outset, and before introducing our speaker, I would like to express our individual and collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live, teach, and learn on their ancestral homeland. My colleague, Professor Azad, will introduce our speaker. Please.
Thank you so much, Professor Tawakkoli Taghi, for this opening. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker today to you all. Maybe just a small word of housekeeping. Just remember to mute yourselves while you're listening. And if you have any questions that come to mind during the talk, by all means, jot them into the chat. Or save them up for the Q&A session, which today will be chaired by my colleague, Edward Shaw Taylor, who works with us in the Invisible East program and is also based at the Khalili Research Center at the University of Oxford and is a PhD student there. Dr. Viola Allegranzi conducts research on texts and material culture from Iran and Central Asia between the 10th and 13th centuries, with a focus on Arabic and Persian inscriptions and their relevance as sources for the cultural history of the Eastern Islamic societies. Her thesis and the resulting book, Aux sources de la poésie ghaznavite, published in Paris 2019, are devoted to the Persian inscriptions from the Ghaznavid period in Afghanistan, so 11th to 12th centuries, and their intersections with poetic anthologies and narrative sources. As a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Iranian Studies of the Austrian Academy of Sciences, Dr. Allegranzi conducted a program on the stucco decoration of the Abbasid mosques in the Islamic East. She is currently PI of the project entitled Inscribing Authority, Islamic Rule in Central Asia, 10th to the 13th centuries, as reflected in monumental epigraphy, which is funded by the Austrian Science Fund and aimed at investigating the textual and visual communication strategies implemented by temporal and religious authorities who patronized monuments throughout medieval Central Asia. Without further ado, she will be talking. The title of her talk is on your screen, Zooming in Architectural Inscriptions from 10th to 13th Century Afghanistan as Recorded in Photographic Archives. I present you Dr. Viola Allegranzi of the Institute of Iranian Studies at the Austrian Academy of Sciences. Viola, this floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Orezou. Thank you, Professor Tawakkoli Taghi. Thank you, Bilal Hashmi, for organizing this lecture. And I'm very honored to participate in the lecture series, Rethinking History. So I should immediately warn you that I will be talking about a research project that started just 1 month ago. So it is still on the launching pad. And moreover, the topic might sound atypical for the series because I'm not analyzing archival material directly. I'm rather using contemporary photographic archives as complementary sources on my study object, that is architectural inscription from medieval Afghanistan. So I'm not an expert in archive management, but a mere user, as many of you, I suppose. And quite reassuring, I'm not alone in promoting this kind of approach. On the contrary, there is a growing interest in the use of photographic archives for the study and preservation of cultural heritage in general, and of endangered cultural heritage in Afghanistan and other conflict areas in particular. And I would say maybe something about the ongoing projects later on. So let me first briefly introduce the research project, Inscribing Authority, subtitled Islamic Rule in Central Asia as reflected in monumental epigraphy, not for self-advertisement, but to better understand the framework of my methodological concerns. So the project is funded by the Austrian Science Fund for a duration of 3 years and is carried out at the Institute of Iranian Studies of the Austrian Academy of Sciences under the mentorship of Dr. Florian Schwarz. So the main themes and questions are summarized on the slide. The project touches on the geography of power, analyzing epigraphic records of political and religious authorities alike, the evolution of honorific titles across times and places, also cross-checking data issued from manuscripts and coins. It aims at reassessing religious inscriptions, namely citation from the Quran and Hadith, pious phrases, etc., but also poetic text as historical sources. This kind of inscription have actually been neglected in previous studies, but are very interesting and informative, actually. The project deals with multilingualism and communication strategies, the combination and specialization of Arabic and Persian language, and the alleged reception of inscriptions connected with the complicated question of visibility and legibility. It investigates the development and circulation of techniques and writing styles across the Islamicate East, taking into account the transmediality of models, but also the multidirectional exchanges with the neighboring regions. So the core corpus is composed of inscriptions originally belonging to secular or religious buildings in modern Afghanistan and the Central Asian Republic, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, corresponding more or less to the historical region of Eastern Khorasan and Transoxiana or Mawar-an-Nar in Arabic sources. At this stage, I only take into consideration texts confidently attributed to the period 10th to 13th century, either on the basis of their content or on archaeological grounds. So a preliminary survey based on data recorded in the Thésaurus d'Épigraphie Islamique has led to identify the total amount of around 150 texts of various lengths, sometimes highly fragmented. These inscriptions have been published or mentioned in previous studies. However, many of them deserve a review. In addition, unpublished epigraphic documents are expected to emerge, and the sources of data collection are multifarious. They include previous publication and individual research that I carried out on Afghan and Uzbek side in particular, fieldwork planned in Tajikistan and hopefully in Turkmenistan, and last but not least, a systematic search in photographic archives of different kinds. So archives of archaeological missions, personal archives of scholars or amateurs, and online repositories that usually draw from a variety of authors and sources. So my talk today concentrates on this last point and on the ways in which photographic archives can be put to good use without getting lost in the abundant material that is now accessible. I will reflect on the advantages and limitations of the study of photos taken by others at different historical moments and from different physical and intellectual perspectives, in cases where fieldwork is restricted or the monument examined is partially or completely ruined. As anticipated, there is an ongoing discussion on digitizing and decolonizing or reframing in museum context and make accessible photographic archives. One example of digital archives for cultural heritage in conflict areas is the Syrian Heritage Archive Project, an initiative of the Museum für Islamische Kunst in Berlin. There is a photo gallery, but also further content, so it's a very rich platform. Moreover, several conferences and workshops have been devoted to the use of photo archives as sources for the study of Islamic sites. And I'm just mentioning this conference at Louvre and Sorbonne Université, organized in 2019. But I also would like to mention a forthcoming event, a panel convened by Sandra Aube and Alka Patel in the framework of the conference of the GISMOM in Strasbourg next June, entitled The Persianate World in Archives, and devoted to Afghanistan. So I will not be attending the panel in person, but I would like today to open up dialogue on this theme to be continued by my colleagues in Strasbourg. And I now turn to mention the main photographic archives that can support research on Islamic architecture and epigraphy in Afghanistan. So what follows is not an exhaustive list, but a selection that highlights the differences between the various types of archives, differences in chronology, geographical coverage, focus, etc. So among the archaeological missions that were active in Afghanistan, mainly but not exclusively before the Russian invasion in 1979, the four on the screen promoted the study and publication of their documentation in the last decades. The Délégation archéologique française en Afghanistan, DAFA, has been present on the field longer than any other, although with some interruptions. The bulk of its photographic archives is kept at Musée Guimet in Paris. It is not inventoried, but organized by sites and teams. And one should add that the personal archives of some of DAFA's former members are deposited at various institutions, and I will mention some of these archives later. In 1222, the Guimet organized an exhibition to celebrate 100 years of DAFA activities. Many photos were displayed and published in the exhibition catalog. On the same occasion, the launch of a digitization program was discussed. Only some sections are currently being digitized, in particular the one on Afghanistan, but the program may move forward in the next few years. The Italian archaeological mission in Afghanistan carried out excavation in the Buddhist and Islamic sites of Ghazni in central eastern Afghanistan between 1957 and 1978, as well as surveys in the early 2000s. Printed photos, slides, and excavation notebooks are kept in Rome at Museo delle Civiltà and Naples at University L'Orientale, and such a documentation gave rise to extensive research in the last decades. The research team affiliated with the mission is also responsible for the creation and updating of an online database. You have the address at the bottom of the screen, funded by the Gerd Enkel Foundation, where records, photos, and information on the finds and sites are available. Proportionally, the Islamic finds are more abundant. About 4,000 finds are actually online, more abundant than the Buddhist items, and they constitute an exceptional repository of epigraphic material compared with other sites in Afghanistan, but I can say in the Islamicate world in general. The Helmand System project carried out surveys and excavation in Afghanistan in the 70s. Thanks to the efforts of some of his former members, the long-forgotten archives have recently been studied with a view to publication, and a volume on the sites was published in 2022. A second issue on the materials is in preparation. More recently, the German-Afghan archaeological mission in Afghanistan launched the Ancient Herat project, aiming at the study, restoration, and publication of Herat urban sites and the materials from the City Museum. A further volume dealing with surveys in the Herat region is in preparation, but Ute Franke kindly shared some photographs with me some years ago, and I will show some of them later in this presentation. Personal archives are those collected by scholars in various fields, archaeologists, architects, art historians, but also ethnologists, as well as by other passerbys, diplomats, travelers, etc. So different interests lie behind the lens and directed the shoots. This is again a non-exhaustive list and is mainly based on photos used for my previous research on Afghan Islamic monuments. Oskar von Niedermeyer was a German general, well-versed in philology and anthropology, who participated in a Turco-Indo-German expedition in Afghanistan, aiming at convincing the Emir Aminullah to attack British India. An album of the photos he took in Afghanistan was published in 1924 in collaboration with the historian of Islamic art Ernst Dietz, which include numerous photos of historical monuments. And von Niedermeyer archive is kept at the Bavarian State Archives in Munich. Robert Byron, trained as a Byzantinist, was a noted British traveler and author. His most celebrated work, The Road to Oxiana, is an account of his journey through Iran and Afghanistan. And Byron's photographs offer a rich visual companion to his writings. The archive is kept at Conway Library, Courtauld Institute of Art in London, but many photos are accessible online on the repository ArchNet, to be mentioned later. As anticipated, several members of the DAFA gathered personal archives during their missions, and this archive includes copies of photos deposited in the DAFA archives as well as unpublished ones. I only mentioned two individuals, André Godard, who was in Afghanistan before moving to Iran in 1928 as director of the Archaeological Service of Iran. Godard was in Afghanistan together with his wife, Yedda Godard, who was well-versed in Oriental languages, and actually Yedda read some inscriptions from Ghazni. Others were published by Samuel Fleury, a Swiss scholar on the basis of Godard's photographs. Godard's archives are kept at Louvre Museum, and their cataloging and digitization is in progress. So around 400 photos out of 14,000 are taken in Afghanistan. Marc Lebert was the architect of the DAFA for more than 30 years. His collection of photographs, around 6,500, was donated to the Institut d'études indiennes at Collège de France, and it has been inventoried, and about 500 photos have been digitized and are accessible online on the platform Salamandre. And I didn't see this archive yet, but I have an appointment for the early summer, and I think he visited a very huge number of sites, so it should be very interesting, and something new is going to appear. Rudolf Stuckert was a Swiss architect who resided in Afghanistan during Second World War, and his photographic collection has been classified and digitized in the framework of the platform Bibliotheca Afghanica at Basel University. So I put the link to the related Phototeca Afghanistan, but I noticed that this link is currently inaccessible, so hopefully it will be restored soon. I will later give a more detailed description of the archives of the American traveler and photographer Josephine Powell, as well as those of the German ethnologist Bernd Glatzer, as these two collections are of crucial importance for my ongoing research. But I finally mention here the huge photographic archives composed of about 40,000 items of Professor Robert Hillenbrand, honorary fellow at Edinburgh University and specialist of Islamic art, which is currently being digitized and catalogued thanks to the funding of the British Institute of Persian Studies, the Iran Heritage Foundation, and the Iran Society. So Hillenbrand traveled extensively across the Islamic countries and was in Afghanistan in 1966. Very briefly on online repositories, I mentioned only a few. There are certainly others that you know and I'm not still aware of. So I already mentioned ArchNet, which results from a collaboration between the Aga Khan Trust for Culture and the Aga Khan Documentation Center at MIT Libraries. It is an invaluable resource for the knowledge of past and contemporary Islamic architecture. Records are classified by site under the original name and include a short description and photos from different authors and period, but one can also search by collection or navigate the digital libraries of studies, restoration program, etc. So it's very rich. I've already mentioned the Phototeca Afghanistan, currently not accessible, gathering photos by Stuckert and others with detailed captions. And this is very important because when you have a huge archive, sometimes you just don't know how to find what you're looking for. And so indexing archives is a key strategy. PastView is a recent discovery for me. It is an online platform where users can upload past photos of places worldwide, sticking them on a map, so it looks like that. Most users are Russian, and as a result, sites located in the former Soviet Union are more abundantly documented than Afghan sites, but is nevertheless useful. Finally, it is not useless to look for more recent photographs documenting the current state of a monument, restoration, etc., on mainstream pages such as Google Maps, Wikimedia Commons, etc. So before passing to some case studies, let's zoom in to Josephine Powell archive. Josephine Powell traveled extensively from the Mediterranean countries to Southeast Asia, nurturing her passion for photography, ethnography, and material culture, in particular textiles. In 2002, she donated her photographic archive to the Harvard University Fine Arts Library. It entered the library in different lots, and many copies of her photo are also dispersed in several collections. Part of her photographs and objects are also kept at Koç University in Turkey. So Powell was in Afghanistan between 1959 and 1968, that is, at the time of the main archaeological expeditions and exploration by Western scholars, who were more than happy to use her photos already at that time. In fact, she visited a tremendous number of sites, even in the most peripheral areas of the country, and documented finds kept at the Kabul Museum, some of which are lost today. I'm showing photographs of the famous Nogombad Mosque and the so-called Baba Hatim Mausoleum near Balkh. In the case of the latter monuments, the photos she took inspired the subsequent survey and publication by Melikian Shirvani. Photos taken in Afghanistan are about 3,200, a few less than a half of which in color, and constitute the bulk of the digitized part of the collection. High-definition images are accessible online through the Harvard Library platform, Hollis Images, and usable for publication after consent. The photographic album of Afghanistan, I put the cover at bottom left, that is the catalog of an exhibition organized in Kabul, was also published in 2017. A different case is that of Bernd Glatzer Archive, which is a kind of monographic archive resulting from the scholar's ethnographic fieldwork in the Rajasthan region of northwestern Afghanistan, the modern Badghis region, inhabited by Pashtun nomadic tribes. With his associate, Mikhail Kazimir, Glatzer discovered and surveyed the little accessible site of the madrasa known as Shahi Mashhad in 1970, 1971, and 93. His publications remained a reference for the study of this monument and its inscriptions. Glatzer's photographs, around 300, are of fundamental importance too, as the madrasa is now in ruin. Glatzer himself indexed the photos, locating them on the madrasa floor plan and elevation. Notwithstanding his efforts, it is not easy to get an overall view of the original structures from the photographs because of the stylistic variety and profusion of details in the architectural decoration. So it is finally time to move on to case studies. And these relate to a group of sites in northwestern Afghanistan, all attributable to the long-lasting rule of the Ghurid Sultan Ghiyath-ud-Din Muhammad ibn Sam. I will focus on the two domed structures, gunbads, at Chisht-e-Sharif, one dated to 1167, the other probably slightly later. An important comparison is the aforementioned Shahi Mashhad Madrasa. I will also mention, albeit in less detail, the minaret of Jam, interpreted as the main surviving vestige of the Ghurid capital city, Firozpur, and the great mosque of Herat, which Sultan Ghiyath-ud-Din restored in the late 12th century, ordering the construction of an adjoining mausoleum where he was probably buried. So Chisht-e-Sharif is located circa 140 kilometers east of Herat, on the Hari route. It later became famous as the place of origin of the Chishtiya Sufi Brotherhood, which developed mainly in India from the 13th century onwards, and unfortunately, its early history in Afghanistan is barely documented. We have virtually no sources. Here is an overview of the chronology of the main photographic surveys of Chisht-e-Sharif gunbads. And I must say, although each side has its own history, the chronology is not dissimilar for other monuments in the region. Oskar von Niedermeyer first documented the site in the early 20th century, and subsequent visits by Western scholars concentrated between the 1950s and the 1970s. André Maric visited the site on his way to Jam, and in the volume devoted to the minaret, co-authored with Gaston Viet in 1959, a short appendix is devoted to Chisht. Marc Lebert conducted a second survey on behalf of the Dafa in 1960, and in the same years, Josephine Powell passed by and extensively documented the site. Later visits by Robert Hillenbrand and Bernard Hockane also date from the period before the Russian invasion in 1979, while in 1981, the Afghan Rafi Samizai included the monuments in a booklet devoted to the Islamic monuments of Herat entitled A Study Towards Conservation. In spite of this, the monuments have continued to deteriorate, as you can notice from later photographs by Franke and Urban, particularly the smaller one on the right, whose dome and northern portal collapsed. The restoration, or rather consolidation, undertaken by the Ministry of Information and Culture of Afghanistan, documented by this photograph published in a book edited by UNESCO in 2015, only affected the larger structure. So the fact that the two gunbads were almost always photographed from the same nicer perspective, that is from the south, has created a misunderstanding as to their original function, especially for those who did not survey the site in person. They were interpreted as domed mausolea, by comparison with monuments such as the twin tomb towers at Karakan near Kazvin, or other example in the Islamicate East. And this impression might have been supported by the fact that the sites are surrounded by graves due to their proximity with the later mausoleum of the Sufi saint Maudud Chishti. However, having a look at past and recent views from north and northeast, it is clear that the domed structures were not freestanding, but were originally part of larger architectural constructions. As reported by Sami Zai, the locals defined the two gumbaz as a madrasa, the bigger southwestern structure, and the mosque, the smallest northeastern one, which actually have a mihrab on its west wall and a further niche on the exterior. And these details are already visible on the plan and elevation drawn by Lebert. Indeed, Lebert authored the entry on Chisht in Warwick Ball's Archaeological Gazetteer of Afghanistan, and this entry is to date the most accurate description of the site. Lebert observes, and I quote, "Nothing else remains of this monument, but the north, east, and west walls show traces of prolongation in these three directions." End of quote. So he realized that they were part of a larger structure. And the short distance between the two gumbads, about 20 meters, reinforced the hypothesis that they were part of a single complex, although they may have been erected or renovated at different times. The function of this complex remains uncertain, and the funerary destination of at least part of it cannot be discarded. I think that Alka Padel, in her book on the Shamsabani architecture, is advancing the hypothesis of a funerary madrasa, which is totally plausible. And I hope that a thorough study of the inscriptions and perhaps one day excavations will provide data to solve this issue. As for the epigraphic data, the several inscriptions recorded outside and inside the two structures have been studied only partially and never in a comprehensive way. A review of the published and unpublished text is therefore essential and can only be based on the photos available. The first inscription published by Marie Canviet in 1959 is the one once framing the portal of the northeastern Gunbad, which I name after Lebert, Structure B. A short section of this monumental text in bordered Kufic survives on each side of the entrance. On the right, we probably read the incipit of a construction text containing truncated titles of Riyad-ud-Din, who is known from both epigraphic and manuscript sources as Al-Sultan al-Mu'azzam, Shahanshah al-Azam, the glorified Sultan, the most exalted king of kings. On the left, part of the date is extant, but the year is unfortunately missing. Visually comparable foundation text in bordered Kufic ornate the portals of the Shahi Mashhad Madrasa, whose construction is ascribed to an unknown queen, probably a member of the Ghurid family, and of the Great Mosque of Herat, where the long titulature of Riyad-ud-Din is recorded. Other comparisons in the cultural horizon of medieval Khorasan are the entrance arch of the prayer hall of the Great Mosque of Dihistan in Turkmenistan, inscribed with a restoration text in the name of the Khwarezm Shah Muhammad ibn Tekesh, and the fragmented foundation text of the Hanafi Madrasa in Zuzan or Zauzan in Iran, attributed to a local governor vessel of the Khwarezm Shah. Thus, in the Ghurid period and immediately afterwards, it was common to frame entrance or inner portals overlooking a courtyard of religious buildings with highly ornate construction text in bordered Kufic. And so in this sense, the inscription from Chisht participate in this visual tradition, although its position within the general layout of the site remains unclear. Stucco epigraphic bands run along the inner walls and arcades of the southwestern structure, and they were only partially deciphered until 2016, when Ludwig Kalous published online on the Thésaurus d'épigraphie islamique a version based on unpublished photos from the archives of Gaston Viette. So these photos were probably taken by Marik because Viette were never in Afghanistan. And moreover, it is strange that the two of them did not mention this inscription in their publication of the site. So they were probably keeping this for a later publication that never saw the light. These texts are puzzling because the lower one in ornate round script, so this one running horizontally, contains pre-Sultanian titles of Riyat ad-Din, who is called Malik, and Shams ad-Din, so you have the title here, is not called yet Riyat ad-Din. While the upper inscription along the arcades in Kufik, an exceptionally composed in Persian, records the date of 562, 1167, which follows Riyat ad-Din's supposed accession to the throne in 558. So this is one of the unresolved mystery of the building, and one may admit that the inscriptions were executed at different times or at the beginning and completion of the works, but I have the feeling that something is eluding us. And as a matter of fact, the chronology of the Ghurid Sultanate is still poorly known, and a more thorough study of numismatic sources is needed to complement the established historiographical narrative. And by the way, it is also interesting that this section of the inscription with the date that is shown on the right of the slide was already published in 1985 by Sheila Blair, but not the rest of the inscription. So this reflects the interest of scholars, but also of photographers sometimes, who were really focused on the documentation of historical data, while Quranic inscriptions and other were neglected. But of course, these examples show that a comprehensive view of epigraphic text often complicate former interpretation, but it's something that one also should take into account. Josephine Powell's photographs allowed me to identify and publish inscription both outside the larger structure A and inside the smaller structure B. Their decipherment and study is still ongoing, but I can share some preliminary results. On structure A facade, left of the portal, a terracotta epigraphic panel records the Quranic verse 28, referring to God's most beautiful names, Al-Asma al-Husna. Interestingly, an enumeration of divine name is inscribed inside the structure, following the ruler's titles, and the presence of divine names may be connected with a funerary context, following the renowned hadith, Allah has 99 names, 100 minus 1. Whoever memorizes them all will enter paradise. Moreover, the outside text reads from bottom to top, in the sense that you first read the bottom line and then the upper one, and this might imply a talismanic function. On the right of the portal, the fragmented inscriptions in carved terracotta and stucco are still undeciphered. Inside structure B, the photographs show an elaborate architectural decoration in stucco covering the west wall above the mihrab. This decoration includes niches, panels, and frames, as well as several epigraphic bands that I've published in a recent article. Apart from titles of Riyat ad-Din repeated again, so they were already inscribed on the portal, we find religious invocations and doxologies, but there is also a barely visible inscription which records an artisan signatures, possibly the one of the designer and or executor of the stucco revetment. The text is truncated and reads a work of Muhammad, son of Abu Bakr, known as, but the nickname is lost. Unfortunately, the inscription framing the mihrab itself were very damaged already in the early 70s, as you can see in the photo at top right. And the stucco decoration of the Qibla wall totally vanished in the following decades, as O'Kane photos shows. At the time of Franke and Urban's survey in 2006, most inscriptions in stucco, including the lower epigraphic band inside structure A, were lost. However, recent photos are still valuable for the observation of technical features of the inscriptions and of the architectural decoration. They show details that are little visible on photos of the pre-digital era and thus have remained understudied in previous literature. This includes details on how bricks were cut and assembled to create modular geometric patterns. Interestingly enough, the same patterns are repeated identical on several monuments, although composing different general layouts, bearing witness of the circulation of models. One can compare the knotted motifs and assembled palmettes on the facade of Chisht, structure A, with those on the lower tier of the minaret of Jam, also located on the Hari River, 70 kilometers east of Chisht Sharif, and dated 8 years after the southern western Gumbad. So these photos of the minaret result from a survey made with a drone by the Econem team in 2017. And this was done with a view to a restoration program that unfortunately was never realized. Econem photographs allowed me to detect interesting details about the inscriptions on the minaret, which were studied by Sir Deltomin based on Lebert photographs and published in a monograph in 2004. In particular, HD photos reveal that the epigraphic band containing the date is actually a later addition in plaster at the top of a compartment with geometric pattern in cut brick. One can imagine that the date was added after the completion of the construction walls, which may have lasted several years, because the minaret is 65 meters high and has a highly elaborated architectural decoration. Moreover, a close-up view of the epigraphic panel containing the artisan's signature allowed me to amend its reading. Although the craftsman is not the same, the formulation, the very structure of the text is identical to that encountered in Chisht. The opening Ramal is followed by the name and then the nickname introduced by the phrase Ma'aruf B, known as. And in Jam, Ma'aruf was previously read Me'emar, architect. By Sir Deltomin, but I suspect that the signature may actually refer to the designer of the architectural decoration rather than to the architect of the minaret. Other cases prompt us to conduct a systematic comparative analysis of inscriptions from different sites, sharing cultural references and visual languages. Inscriptions with identical contents are recorded at Chisht Sharif and Shahi Mashhad, for instance. The first example is the quotation of the Quranic verse 23-24 from Surah 59, followed by an enumeration of names of God, 11 of which are already mentioned in the Quranic passage. Interestingly, the two identical texts are reproduced according to very different visual models. So at Chisht, we have an epigraphic band in ornate round script, horizontal, while in Shahi Mashhad, there is this panel, largely damaged, but still we can see the interlaced multi-directional epigraphic band in Kufic script. Very interesting are also some small-sized inscriptions hidden in the ornamentation and containing the names of the first 4 caliphs. Inside Chisht structure B, they are enclosed in 3 roundels, inserted in an intricate pattern within a niche. Even more inconspicuous are the tiles embedded in a knotted element adorning the foundation inscription on Shahi Mashhad portal and repeating the name of the caliph. Comparable mentions of the Prophet Muhammad and the caliph compose a five-pointed star motif inside a medallion with Allah at the center on the back wall of the main Ivan of the Hanafi Madrasa in Zuzan, Iran. And I mentioned this monument before. An identical, though unglazed, medallion with mentions of the four caliphs has been recorded in the Great Mosque of Golpayegan in early 12th century Iran. And other inscriptions in this mosque testify to the Sunni Orthodox orientation of the epigraphic program. And Lawrence Korn, who published the inscription in Golpayegan, also documented these small stucco tiles inside the mosque of Kirva in southern Iran, which again mention Muhammad, the four caliph, Ali, and the two sons of Ali. So in this case, we can imagine that there is a sort of ecumenic claim to unite the Sunni and Shia communities who were praying in this mosque. But we don't know which was the actual function of this inscription. And actually, they were difficult for a reader or a viewer even to be discerned. And they probably had a symbolic devotional value that I think deserve further investigation. And now I must apologize for taking you so far to zoom in on monumental inscriptions. So I will stop here with case studies and conclude with some general reflection. So needless to say, photographic archives make it possible to preserve a visual trace of sites and monuments that are in a poor state of conservation or have disappeared. Hence, the scientific community must continue to encourage digitization projects aiming at making them publicly available without neglecting the process of cataloging and description on which their effective consultation depends. As the latest examples have shown, not only digital photos, but also high-definition scans of archive photographs give us the opportunity to observe monumental inscriptions in detail, as well as architectural decoration, for instance. In general, digitized images are not only easier to access and disseminate, but also better exploitable than printed photos, thanks to the possible use of graphic editing softwares. However, extensive search in physical or digital archive is often necessary to select shots that present original close-up views. Moreover, it must be considered that while many inscriptions are fragmentary in themselves, others are only known to us in segments due to the gaps in their photographic documentation. So sometimes the photographer was just not interested in the inscription and he stopped at some point, and we will never know what was coming after that point. The disadvantages of a photo-based examination include the difficulty of observing the technical details of the inscriptions and the surrounding architectural decoration, as well as the risk of getting an incomplete and often distorted view of the architectural context. So my methodological response to these challenges, which I hope I've shown through these case studies, is to cross-check alternative views of the same monuments issued from different archives and taken at different times, but also to compare epigraphic data issued from different monuments in the same region or even in a larger region to better understand the production process, textual content, and the cultural resonance of inscriptions. So this is indeed the aim of my project, gathering a wide and expandable corpus of interconnected documents produced in medieval Afghanistan and beyond. And I thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to receiving your comments and questions.
Thank you, Viola Allegranzi, for such a fascinating survey of how much we can enrich our understanding of these sort of lesser known medieval areas by diving into this sort of untapped resources and these amazing photo archives. So thank you so much. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions from the audience. So perhaps if people would like to raise their hands, or if they'd rather use the chat, then I'm happy to read out whatever questions people have.
We already have a question in the chat, Ed.
Yes, so we have a question. I would like to ask about the Quranic/Hadith and poetic epigraphic inscriptions on these structures. In your experience, what is the range of functions or applications for such inscriptions? What are the sources of the poetry, Arabic and/or Persian?
Yes, so thank you very much for this question, which is a big one. I tried to give some elements of response, and some other elements I think I'm still searching for them. I can answer about poetic inscription because this was the work I carried out in my previous research. Actually, for the monuments I showed, there is no much poetic inscription. In Ghurid epigraphy, we don't know poetic text. Is maybe because we only have religious monuments extant, while for instance, in Ghazni, in Ghaznavid architecture, we do have poetic inscription, but in secular structures mainly. And these inscriptions are versified text composed by contemporary poets in praise of the ruler who patronized this building. Sometimes we know the authors of the poem, sometimes we don't know the authors, but the motifs are very similar to the poetic anthology produced in the same context. As for religious inscription, this is very interesting, but this is actually the target of my project, to gather a big corpus and then be able to compare different sides and to see which kind of Quranic quotation are repeated in which positions within the monuments. Is there a standard Quranic quotation, or are there deviations from the standard in particular places? So this is something that I'm going to investigate. I can already say that we have very few hadiths in this period, and I think at Shahi Mashhad is one of the first hadith documented in monumental epigraphy, and we are already in the 12th century. Interesting enough, these hadith are version different from the canonic hadith known from the sixth collection of Sunni hadith composed in Central Asia at the same time. So like version probably circulating back then, and mostly relate to prayer and to devotional practices. So really adapted for the context of use.
Brilliant, thank you. We have another question in the chat from Sarah Bijani. In terms of collecting more photos, have there been any attempts to reach and request the Afghani diaspora in Canada, the US, and beyond for personal family photos? Sometimes there are many incidental photos of historical sites found in family homes.
Not yet, but actually, yeah, this is a great advice, like to be in contact with Afghan community, either in Canada, US, but also in Europe, of course. And I mean, of course, I was in contact with Afghan collaborator of the Italian archaeological mission, for instance, other collaborator from the Kabul Museum, but of course also private photographs can be valuable. Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm going to exploit my position and ask a question of my own, if I may. You showed these amazing examples of sort of different scripts being used in really close proximity. So the sort of signatures by the sort of Amala signatures always seem to be in a round style. And then you had, I think, that example where the outside was in this sort of knotted bordered Kufic. And then on the inside, there was one band of round style, but then the arch, I think it was in Chist, was in a sort of more floriated Kufic style. I was just wondering if you'd noticed any patterns for the use of these scripts, or how these scripts sort of if there's any way they're kind of understood iconographically, I suppose is the question I'm asking.
Thank you for your question. So actually, I haven't emphasized paleographic details in this presentation, but of course, this is also one of my interest in particular, the spread of round style in epigraphy, which start in these areas around the mid 11th century. So it's something relatively new. But actually, they play a lot with styles, and they play with the juxtaposition of styles in this highly ornated and elaborate architectural decoration. They're juxtaposing text of different content in different style, and there is no apparent correspondences between the content and the style yet, because there will be some correspondences in post-Mongol Iran. But at this epoch, it seems to me that the aesthetic principle of variation and maybe adapting the text to the surface it should cover is what actually made the choice. But of course, this is something that I also would like investigating with more data available.
Absolutely fascinating. I'd be excited to hear more. We have another question from Anna Maria.
Yes, hello. Thank you again to the organizers for putting together this fantastic event. And Viola, thank you for the talk. It's great to see the project, the start of project, and it's extremely important. I have a few comments or maybe kind of suggestions. Looking at the Gaston Viet photo of the lower stucco inscription on your slide 16, I think it seems very similar to slightly later stucco inscription at Farumat Friday Mosque and Khosrow Shir Friday Mosque. So that, and they also have craftsman signatures, so that could be very interesting comparison maybe. Then the signatures in general, it would be great to make a corpus of craftspeople signatures. As you know, I worked for Ilkhanid period on the same question in Iranian territory. And my colleague Agajani, I believe he's also been working on Seljuk signatures for Iranian territory. Then slide 21, Minaret of Jam signatures. I suggest to look at Robat Sharaf in northeastern Iran. It also has signatures in the same decorative medium, also craftsman signature, and it has the same research question as yours. It's not clear who this person was. Finally, Rashidun inscriptions on slide 24. There's also Rashidun inscription in Pir Bakran mausoleum on the ceiling in Hatebanai from 1298, I believe. So maybe that could be interesting, but the design is entirely different. But congratulations, and I keep finger crossed for your fantastic project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna Maria. And yeah, thank you. So I've noted all of them. And yeah, I must say that I'm not including inscription from Iran in my project at this stage, because if not, it would be too large for a 3-year project. But of course, these architectural inscriptions from Seljuk Iran are first source, comparative sources. And of course, I know Arajani recent work on the Farumiad mosque and your work on signatures on stucco, because it seems like stucco carvers were the first to sign on architectures, and this is very interesting. So yeah, thank you very much. And I think we will have also the opportunity to discuss these particular points together at some point. Thank you.
We have a question from Alka and then a couple from the chat. So Alka, you go first.
Viola, thank you for your wonderful presentation. Really benefited a lot. And
sorry, I cannot hear you. Do you hear well?
I can hear, yeah.
Okay. Could you just speak a little
Hello, Viola. Can you hear me better? No?
I try like that. Yeah.
Oh dear. I'm sorry. Well,
Yeah.
I was just thanking you for the wonderful presentation. It was a nice revisit, so to speak, to these sites. So the question that I had, which I put in the chat, but I decided to combine it with another, was you mentioned a fascinating implication for a certain talismanic use on the exterior, the inverted up and down lines at the chest structure on in the front. So I was hoping you might be able to say a little bit more about that, and if there are other instances where these types of kind of jarring, let's say, sequential inversions occur. And also, I found this reinterpretation, shall we say, of hadith to be curious. And as you know, I'm continuing the Shansab project now focused on India. And in the Indian inscriptions, there is just kind of a rampant, if you will, reinterpretation of the hadith texts. Part of it is also problematized by virtue of the fact that both in terms of recreating the program as well as publishing it, there are some strange practices, if you will. But I'm just wondering how this kind of inventiveness or interpretive practice with hadiths can be understood, and where else perhaps one might have seen that, if at all, and if there's a way of just trying to figure out how it is that there is this deviation from a canonical norm.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So for the talismanic function, it's just a working hypothesis now. And it's something that, because actually this inversion of lines usually doesn't occur on architectural texts, but we have it often on objects, like magic cup or magical objects. So the text that can be inverse, can be mirrored. Also, I have in mind later material. But since these divine names could have a protective function, and the position on the facade as well is in line, could be something that have a apotropic value at least. But of course, I have to look for a comparison also in a larger horizon. And about, yes, this is very present of the name of God, and their function is still very open, because of course there is this hadith, and so they are connected with the idea of entering paradise, and sometimes we have these names of God inscribed on tombs as well. But of course, it can be something completely different, because at that time, there was also a theological debate about the very nature of God's attributes. So it could be something even more complicated in a sense. And of course, I'm looking for a collaborator who is well versed with religious sources from that period, because I think we should contextualize and this text used in these sites were also present in manuscript text circulating at that time. So I think that we can maybe also complicate a little bit our interpretation. Thank you.
We have another question from the chat from Viola Allegranzi, who says, "Thank you so much for the great talk and well-laid methodology. My question is related to positionality of the text. How do we think of the purpose of them being placed, for example, high above and challenging to read? Do we assume existing knowledge was available, and what would they mean to people who are not familiar with that text?"
Yeah, so this is the big question. Actually, I think we were never able to answer, to give a definite answer. But of course, many tests were not visible. So this is something that they were just important I mean, it was just important that they were there, but they couldn't be read by anyone. Other could be read by a very limited group of people, literate people, people who had access to the monument. And so, of course, there is also a play between symbolic value, ornamental value of the text, and actual informative value of them. But so my idea is really trying to understand not only individual text, but also text in relationship with other texts located in the same monument in different position, to see if there are some rules of in the location of particular text. But I don't know if we will actually find some standard placement of text. Thank you.
We have some more questions from the chat. We have 3 questions from Arzu, who says, please answer or ignore as many of these questions as you like. So number 1, to my untrained eye, the stylistic elements look incredibly refined and sophisticated. Could you speculate on the development of the tradition of craftsmanship? For example, do we have any manuals or guides on monument epigraphy that have survived and were copied in pre-modern Persian? And then the second question, the photo archives you have already collected and consolidated are fascinating and can offer an important resource. Do you have any plans to consolidate and digitize the images of the inscriptions? And then finally, can you tell us about your project team and their expertise besides your own?
All right, thank you for the 3 questions. And yeah, so about the craftsmanship, actually we don't have sources, written sources for this period. We have for later period. But of course, some example I show and others show that there were models circulating and that there were craftsmen traveling around from one side to the other. There are also particularity of every site depending on the material available, of the local tradition, for instance, sculpture on stone rather than stucco carving. So there are particularity, but also trends that can be traced in this area that goes from Khorasan to northern India in this period. But of course, craftsmen and models were circulating for decoration and for inscription as well, I think. So the second question
was the whether you have plans to digitize the images from the archives. Yeah.
Actually, the purpose is to build a database and of course, at the end of the project, make it available. The question of photographs is still under discussion at my institute because, of course, it needs space and it needs also the right of reproduction. Many photos are available already online. So the idea is also just to also give reference to photos that already exist. But I hope that I can include photos on my database, because if I propose some new reading, I want that people could also check themselves the text if they want, and also comments upon my reading, so that there is a follow-up in this sense. And yeah, about my team, actually, my project is an individual project, is a small one, but of course I'm working with a network of collaborators, and as I said, I'm looking for people working on religious manuscript, looking for sources of inscriptions. My friend Arturo Anucci hopefully is helping me with coins, and so yes, I'm working with many colleagues interested in the cultural history of Central Asia at this stage, and hopefully I will develop a further project, a continuation with a consolidated team later on.
Great. We have a few more questions in the chat. I'm not sure we'll have time to get through all of them, but I'll go through them in order since that seems fairest. So very short question. Manek just wonders whether any Zoroastrian structures have been sort of discovered through these archives.
I mean, I'm not myself discovering structures, and I'm looking at Islamic monuments. So there are probably Zoroastrian structure
Mhm.
in the region as well, but I'm not, it's not my focus, so I'm not looking at them. Thank you.
So Fatima Sudavar says the magnificent painted script inside the Siri Alemdar of Damghan is earlier than the Ghurid monuments. Was there any influence on brick and stucco calligraphy?
Yeah, so it's early, and yes, I mean, of course, what we have today is a collection of monuments, but they were many more. It was a continuum at that time, and so the Ghurid inscriptions and monuments are inscribed into a tradition that is originated in Khorasan, but is also influenced from Middle Eastern models, from Indian or Central Asian models as well. So there is a confluence of models in this region at that time. But yes, for epigraphy, I think this tradition developed in 11th century Iran of ornate Kufic juxtaposed with round script is crucial for what is coming after. Absolutely.
So another one from the chat from Ute Franke, who says, thanks so much for the interesting talk. It's great to see these sources being explored. I just wanted to add that the monuments in Chisht and Mashhad have similar plans as well, and both were most probably part of a larger complex.
Yeah, absolutely. So it seems very close, and the epigraphic program is very close, and the decorative program. And yeah, so it's something I would like to devote a monographic study to these two monuments. Actually, I've not enough material yet, and yeah, but I thank you for being here, and I think I will be in contact with you later, because I think we should also share information again about what you saw in the Rat region, and probably a network of religious buildings were developing at that time in the region, and it's very interesting to try to reconnect them all. Thank you.
Yeah, we have another one from the chat from Jolien Leslie, who says, my question is more from an architectural perspective. We've recently been looking in detail on site at the assembly of the applied decoration at Jam Minaret, with a view to hopefully stabilizing the most fragile sections, which are disintegrating at a pace, and have found indications that some parts seem to have been fabricated in panels. Does the possibility of manufacture of panels off-site have implications for the interpretation of the inscriptions or decoration?
Thank you for this question. Yes, I also noted that on these high-resolution photographs of the Jain minaret, in particular, this Quranic inscription of the Surah Maryam on the lower part of the minaret is all composed by assembled panels. And I think that at Shai Mashhad, they're also using the same technique, probably for very complicated designs. They were using this, assembling off-site and then putting on the wall. I don't think there is something is changing in the interpretation of the inscription, but of course it is interesting to better understand the phases this design was created and installed. So absolutely, yes. Thank you, and yeah, thank you for these details.
Fascinating. So we have one more question in the chat, which I think will be our last in a long series of questions, which you've answered very well. So we have Jacopo Bruno, who says, thanks so much for this fascinating paper. I really appreciated your attention to and consideration of the architectural and archaeological context. As far as Chista Sharif is concerned, I agree with you with your suggestion that the domes were part of a large architectural complex. On the satellite image you showed us, some of the wall alignments could be reconstructed on the ground. Whether there is any chronological correspondence between these and the domes remains to be seen, of course. Have any archaeological surveys been carried out in the area?
Yeah, so Absolutely. The Ancient Iraq projects surveyed the area, and they will be published the result of this survey. But of course, archaeological work was not possible, and I don't think it has never been carried out by Afghan as well. So at Shai Mashhad as well, there was no archaeological investigation, just survey. Of course, if one could excavate just some point just to understand the morphology of the site. Of course, this is not, I'm not archaeologist myself, I'm not an architect, but one can easily understand. But there are also comparable monuments elsewhere, for instance, in the Bamiyan region, where the Dafa made some surveys some years ago that are also comparable. So I think that, yeah, for the time being, we have to be satisfied with comparison, and then maybe in the future we will have some archaeological confirmation of our hypothesis. Thank you, Jacopo.
Brilliant. So if there are no more questions, I'm sure everyone would like to join me in saying thank you to Viola Allegranzi for an absolutely wonderful talk and a fascinating discussion afterwards. So much for me personally to think about, and I'm sure the same elsewhere. So thank you very much to Viola.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Allegranzi, for your fascinating presentation. And thank you, Ed Shaw Taylor, for moderating this important session. And on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Azad, I want to thank you for joining us and wishing you a happy, healthy, and inspiring Nowruz.
Nowruz Piruz.
Nowruz Piruz.
Piruz. Thank you so much, Viola.